So my name is Thorvardur Halfdanarson. I'm a medical oncologist, work at the Mayo Clinic, and my practice is predominantly neuroendocrine tumors, and mostly actually a clinician more than a researcher. So most of my time spent at Mayo is really seeing patients. And then I have a number of other roles there. So this is the outline of my talk. So I'll briefly talk about some changes in epidemiology. We heard some of this yesterday. Discuss two very important clinical trials presented this year and last year, and then spend some time on patient involvement in research, not necessarily specific to neuroendocrine tumors. Okay, so let's start with the epidemiology. I don't think I can give a talk without having at least one or two epi slides. So why are we talking about this? Well, these are data from England. So this is a work led by Dr. Ramets, who's in the room with us, showing rising incidence and prevalence of neuroendocrine neoplasms in England. So these are now thought to be the 10th most prevalent cancer in England, second most prevalent GI cancer after colorectal cancer. So these are not trivial numbers. And as you can see on the graphs there, the incidence is increasing. So for the rectum, we're seeing more than 700% increase in that time period since 1995. And you can just look. It doesn't matter what type of NET you look at, this is really becoming more common or more commonly diagnosed. And the reasons for that are multiple, probably to some extent just better diagnostics, more awareness, better scans, more scans, and all of those things. Well, this holds true in other countries as well. So I'm just showing you data from Norway. So this is from the Norwegian Cancer Registry, which is an incredibly thorough registry, almost the whole population, 99%. As you can see there, there's a threefold increase in the incidence of NETs over the last 3 decades, but not so much for the next. The neuroendocrine carcinomas haven't really changed that much. And similar to what I showed you from England, this applies to all the different types of NETs of different anatomic origins. So on the left-hand side, you can see the changes in the incidence. So these are new cases diagnosed over a period of time. On the right-hand side, you can see the incidence of, you can see the prevalence number. So these are the number of patients actually living with NET diagnosis. And some of them may have had curative intent therapy. Some of them may have active disease, either being observed or on therapy. So it is really a truly mixed bag of patients. So because of this, the need for NET research and the need for patient involvement in NET research will only increase. So ultimately, most patients with advanced NETs will run out of options, and we need to expand our treatment choices. So we can only do that with your help. So there's need for more NET therapy trials in the future, and these trials should be patient-centered and importantly informed by input from patients and patient advocates, because at the end of the day, this is all being done for the patients. So let's talk about two recent trials, and NETO2 and CABINET. So going into, before we go into that, just see what we have accomplished in the last few decades. So this is sort of the timeline of NET therapeutics going back to 1982 when it got streptozotocin, which has sort of left the scene but may be coming back. I think it still has a role. And then in the late 80s, we got octreotide, and then 2011, same issue of the New England Journal. We got data on everolimus and sunitinib in pancreatic NETs, lanreotide, everolimus for lung NETs, telotristat for carcinoid syndrome diarrhea, capecitabine temozolomide for pancreatic NETs, and then the improvement in the diagnostics with the gallium-68 and copper-64, somatostatin receptor imaging, and then obviously PRRT with lutetium, and then most recently, possibly, cabozantinib. And then in 2020-something, I think we'll get alpha particle therapy. So obviously, as you know, there is a lot of activity going on there. So let's talk about NETO2. So this was a study published this year in Lancet. So this was a randomized phase 3 study looking at patients with sort of high-risk grade 2 NETs. So this is KS7, 10% or more, or well-differentiated grade 3 NETs, previously untreated. Patients were randomized to either 4 cycles of PRRT versus high-dose octreotide. And the primary endpoint was progression-free survival. So that is the time until progression. And those who got octreotide, if they progressed, they could cross over to the PRRT. So everyone ultimately got PRRT. Well, what did we find? So we found that there was a very significant difference in progression-free survival, 23 months with PRRT versus 8.5 months with octreotide. So this was evident across different tumor groups, pancreas, small bowel, grade 3, grade 2. But what needs to be seen is really the effect on overall survival. So we'll have to wait for those data. So this study, the Alliance Cabinet study, was looking at cabozantinib versus placebo in previously treated patients with neurotumors grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3. This was presented at ESMO last year. This will be presented again on Monday in Barcelona. So we'll have some really fresh data there. And hopefully we'll see the final product of this soon. So here patients were randomized to cabozantinib versus placebo, and again, primary endpoint was progression-free survival. At progression for those on placebo, they could cross over, so everyone got cabo. And here are the results. So on the left-hand side, you can see the extrapancreatic, which were small bowel and lung, and 8.3 months for cabozantinib. This is the median progression-free survival versus 3.2 months. I wish those would have been longer, but this is a very meaningful and both statistically and clinically significant improvement. And on the right-hand side, you can see the pancreatic data. So moving on to really the core of the talk, which is involvement of patients and patient advocates. So I wanted to start with a few definitions, so you know all of this. So what is the definition for a patient advocate? So it's a person with lived experience, either as a patient with cancer or a cancer survivor, or an informed caregiver or care of a person with cancer, who is engaged in advancing something larger for themselves and their community, including increasing awareness, access to resources, and advancing research. So what about research engagement? So research engagement, the definition actually changes across countries. So this is the one that we have in the US. So it's active, meaningful, and collaborative interaction between patient advocates and researchers across all stages of the research process. And why is this important? So, well, it fosters a sense of urgency and purpose. So we need to hear from you. When we design clinical trials, we need to know what is important to patients. So it really truly improves the design of the trials. So if I can come up with what I think is a beautiful trial with great endpoints and selection criteria, and then I present it to you, and you say, this just makes no sense. No one's ever going to do this. And so we really need that input. This can improve the friendliness of the protocols. I'm not sure if you've ever had the pleasure of seeing a research protocol. These are not easy documents. Same thing with the informed consent forms. We need to make this more friendly. And then you have unique connections and networks that can actually make a trial succeed. So I can decide a beautiful trial, but if no one ever hears about it, no one's going to go on it. And so it enhances the focus and the goals of the research. So you are indeed the major stakeholders in cancer research, and you can raise awareness more than anyone else can. And then, importantly, this is increasingly required by funding agencies. So if we don't do this, we're not going to get money. And we heard that other countries are doing the same. So this is what I sometimes discuss as the research continuum. So what is research, clinical research? So you can see we go from basic science research in the lab to translational research, clinical research, implementation research, and then ultimately to me as a clinical practitioner in the clinic. So I think patient advocates and patients can really help with clinical research. So these are the phase 3 trials, but also actually with translational research, and they can actually help with basic science research as well. Implementation research with the pragmatic trials, phase 4 trials, and then clinical practice with patient-reported outcome studies. And indeed, there's a huge study going on, thousands of patients, neuroendocrine patients reporting into a study called NetPro in the US. So there's really a lot of different opportunities for patients to get involved. And so where can patients or patient advocates participate? So as I said, pretty much at any part in the research process. And they can provide valuable contributions in terms of like feasibility, acceptability, relevance, and engagement. So how do we actually get this done? So a reasonable first step is to create a committee of advocates to collaborate with the Cancer Center team. So you need to identify identify the need for involvement, recognize the common cause between the patients and the institutions, and then assemble a group. And ultimately the group, so I'm not going to read this out to you, but really the group that you have for that project should be reflective of the community served by that research. So essentially what that means is that for different projects, you need different types of groups. So you have to have a collective mission to integrate the patient perspective with the institution's goals, and to promote research that is patient-centered, obviously, evidence-based, and we'll hear more about that later, and accessible to as many as possible. And then there have to be defined roles, rules, and responsibilities. So best to do this with written guidelines where the members agree to follow. And you need to be committed to the project, spend some time on this, and be engaged. And there has to be bi-directional communication going back and forth between the research team and the advocates. And you have to really understand the project. I sometimes say that I participate in projects that I really don't fully understand the basic science behind, but I understand the clinical part of it, and that's really what we need. So this is what it could look like from an institutional perspective. So the cancer or the institution, they are committed to informing and educating and supporting a team of researchers, which includes the scientists or the clinical researchers, the advocates, and even learners or students. And that can lead to several different things, including raising awareness for the general public, improved communication, aligning the research focus with aligning the focus of the institutions and patients, can help with funding, and then can help sustain this ongoing sort of collaboration between advocates and the researchers. And this sort of has this feedback loop, feedbacks into the institution, and as we do more of this, we get better at it. So here are some challenges and opportunities. This is from a breast cancer journal, and I actually found this really helpful. I won't read it all, but for us, the researchers, we don't always understand why patients should be involved in this, and we can have some short-term goals and long-term goals. So, and for example, researchers are worried about saying the wrong thing. They're not used to working with patients. So we need to create these support spaces where we can really have this bi-directional discussion, and then ultimately create sort of long-term goals for training programs. And researchers don't really know how to start working with you. So that's another thing we need to do, is to make sure that the patients and patient advocates do get some time spent with the researchers to talk about how they can contribute. And this could ultimately lead into more sort of sustained platforms where this becomes, I wouldn't say more automated, it shouldn't be automated, but it's just more easier to do. And then researchers may not know how to include patients and patient advocates in their projects, and we need to create some programs to make that easier. So I found this a helpful sort of discussion of some of the challenges and the opportunities that we're dealing with. Well, so the final few slides, just wanted to talk about the role of patients and patient advocates in clinical trials, because that's most of my research is outcomes research and trials. So this is a helpful sort of schematic of the life cycle of a clinical trial. Starts with an idea development, and then we sort of work on that idea, ultimately leads to an activation of a clinical trial, conduct of a clinical trial with enrollment. There is a certain oversight that when we have the data, we analyze it, we publish it, we close it. And the patients and the advocates can really get involved in all of these stages, but some of them may be more than others, especially the design of the clinical trial and the conduct of a clinical trial. So, and then it extends beyond the trial design. So once the trial is designed and opened, well, again, raising awareness, letting people know that there is a trial open that fits with this particular group of patients is very important. And this actually has been shown to be very successful for rare diseases. We have data from sarcoma, from a lot of benign inherited conditions, where leveraging the patient advocacy groups has been absolutely critical for success of those trials. And then reporting the results. I think that's what hasn't really been discussed that much. So the patients and the advocates are taking on a more active role. And sometimes it's just to make sure that the reporting is fair, unbiased, and accessible. And sometimes, and I will be frank with you, that sometimes the the researchers or the funding agencies or pharma will try to put a positive spin on the trial, and it's helpful to have the patients provide the patient experience. So for example, if you have a drug that's marginally effective but very toxic, that may not be a very clinically relevant drug. So this is how I think about it. The activation of a clinical trial starts with the concept, whether that comes from a cooperative group, industry, or within your institution. And then we go through some, what I call sort of institutional processes for assessing feasibility. Well, if it's not a feasible trial, we stop it. If it is, we send it to scientific review. If the science is not sound, we stop the activation. And then it goes to what's called the Institutional Review Board, or IRB. It has different names in different countries. And if that is a go, we activate the trial and start enrolling. If that's not a go, we reject the trial and stop the activation. But where do patients fit in? Well, in here, in the design stage, as I said before, this is very critical to have patients and advocates involved. And also in the activation of the trial and the conduct of the trial, raising awareness, and that getting the patients on the study who need to be on it. And beyond that should also be the reporting of the trial results. So that takes me to the end of the talk, but I just found this yesterday. So as you can see, there's a lot of recognizable names. So these are just a few of the reports in the scientific literature, and I see a lot of you in the room here. So, and just to show you that we really, it really is rewarding to see your names on the end product of what we have been doing. I think we're going to be seeing more and more of this in the future. So that takes me to the end of the talk. Thank you.